$200,000. That's what Kevin spent in a few years on a well-known video game, Red Shadow Legend. Sound familiar? Kevin is therefore what is called, in the jargon, a whale. But what is a whale, you may ask? Whales are the milk cows of free-to-play or pay-to-win games. To put it simply, it's the 1% of players who spend so much money in games that they generate 80% of the turnover of these free-to-play games. But is that a problem in the end? At first glance, you might think, no, these players do what they want with their money. But when you start to take an interest in the mechanism that these free-to-play players use to make them pay more and more, you can ask yourself a few questions. Exactly like sports betting sites or online casino sites, developers analyze gambling behavior, offer them personalized offers, and create mechanisms that push them to spend more and more. By playing on instant gratification and the desire to have what others don't have, whales are no longer just gamers, they have become ultra-priority customers for video game studios. Not very ethical, isn't it? This model, which seems to work wonders for developers, also has perverse effects, and not only for gamers, but for the entire video game industry. By the way, let's talk about this industry for just 2 minutes to realize all the money they handle. In 2023, the gaming sector generated more than $183 billion. To put this in perspective, that's more than the music and film industry combined, which is valued at $98 billion combined. Suffice to say that gaming is the branch of the entertainment industry that brings in the most money by far. Of the $183 billion generated in 2023, the 10 most profitable studios alone earned $54 billion. On top of that, it is also the industry with the most potential for growth in the coming years, a gigantic financial windfall. But how can this industry generate such monstrous numbers, in fact? The answer is quite simple. Just compare the different types of monetization. When you want to listen to music, a small monthly payment on Spotify allows you to have an almost infinite choice. When you want to see a movie, you buy a ticket and it stops there, whereas for video games, it's on a whole other level. Between the purchase of the game, the expansions, the DLCs, the microtransactions, the virtual currencies, the pay-to-win, the battle pass, the season passes, and the best, or rather the worst in the loot box industry. The video game industry is spoilt for choice when it comes to making as much money as possible from its consumers. But how did all these ways of always making players pay more, how does it work, and especially how ethical are they or not? The first way that video game studios make you pay more and more after the purchase of the game in question are expansions. In the early 90s, PC players could purchase additional content in physical formats such as map expansions, game modes, and other variants of the original title, in addition to the basic content through a CD-ROM or additional maps. For example, famous titles from the 2000s like Warcraft, StarCraft, etc. started this practice. At the time, the public didn't really see a problem because the rules were clear. If after exploring a game you wanted to extend the experience, it was possible to buy additional content, often with a nice box as a bonus. In the end, it's true that this way of over-monetizing was perhaps the most logical and ethical of all. Want access to new content? You pay and you get it. But problems started to come with the transition to digital, the arrival of DLCs, and now you may be wondering how DLC can become a problem? With the advent of digital, every big name in the industry saw the potential of DLC early on. Each has tried different experiments, approaches from different angles, so as not to offend consumers, but also to test their limits. Of course, there have been some excellent DLCs, such as the one for The Witcher 3, which are sometimes themselves larger than the base game. And precisely these game expansions have become more and more common to the point that now players expect that there will often be one. But here's the problem. The publishers have instituted a controversial practice where the content initially intended for the base game is cut up and sold separately. And that led to cases where DLC was already present on the physical discs at the release of the game, locked behind a paywall. And that inevitably did not please the players who felt that they had already paid for this content. They felt like the developers were purposely breaking up a game into parts to make the most money out of it rather than releasing the full game directly. And that's not counting the games that are released in deluxe version, including all the content that necessarily costs much more. By dint of cutting games into small parts to sell DLCs, microtransactions have emerged, and they really came into their own with the advent of mobile gaming. These microtransactions therefore allow players to purchase small upgrades or cosmetic items with real money. The idea was to offer small expenses for casual players, but it quickly turned into a major business model for developers. One of the most famous examples would be that of League of Legends, which is a free-to-play game, but which offers its players to buy skins for their favorite hero for real money, or on Fortnite with skins and dances. Microtransactions represent a significant part of so-called free-to-play games, and therefore they have every interest in pushing the consumer to buy as many as possible. And that's where the problem lies, the same one I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Microtransactions are often touted as optional purchases, but they are designed to incentivize players to spend regularly, creating an addictive loop of small payments. In addition, they will segment the community of players between those who can spend freely and those who limit themselves to free content, creating imbalances in the game. Kevin, our whale from Red Shadow Legends, was fooled by this system, but wait, because whales are not only the victims of microtransactions, which are far from being the worst way to monetize a video game. Live service games are games that receive new content and updates for a certain period of time for an indefinite period of time. An American study surveying more than 500 video game studios indicates that more than 95% of them are working on live service games. To have access to these games, you must pay for season passes. These season passes offer time-limited content for a subscription or one-time purchase, often renewable with each new season. The idea here is to keep players engaged for the long haul instead of quickly moving on to another title after release. This model allows developers to monetize games consistently through microtransactions, season passes, and exclusive content. And then you could say to me, okay, but what's the problem? I pay for my season pass and I have access to all the content. Except that it is not. Let's take the example of Rainbow Six, which has 6 seasons at $30. You've already spent $180 to play, not including additional content that you have to pay for on top of that, such as getting weapon skins, and these season passes were soon to evolve into battle passes. What's the difference? The battle pass has a progression system. The more you play, for example, by leveling up, the more free content you will have, such as skins that you will have to unlock before the end of the season. And if you think it's like a season pass where the only difference is that you have to play a lot more, you'd be right. Now you pay, but you also have to play every day to unlock items you've already paid for. But don't worry, if you decide to pay even more, you can get these items directly. These services create a lot of social and psychological pressure on players to stay active and spend so they don't miss out on temporary content, which leads to an economic model based on artificial scarcity, the FOMO, fear of missing out, I think you know, which exploits the need of players to unlock everything they paid for in the allotted time. And I reassure you or not, everything we have just seen so far are the most ethical methods that video game studios have found to make a lot of money. Everything we've seen so far doesn't require you to pay. You can play the game for free. Now, let's get down to the hard stuff. Let's take a look at the worst monetization methods ever created. Virtual currencies come from arcade games. At the time, you paid directly in coins in the machine to get a number of lives and thus be able to play. It's extremely simple and very intuitive. You put your coin in the machine and you can play with the credit you have at stake. But with the advent of online gaming, video game creators have had to replace this method, necessarily. And that's how virtual currencies were born and are used in a lot of games. For example, in Dofus with the O-Green, in EVE Online with the Plex, in Fortnite with the V-Bucks. In short, you get the idea. You buy virtual in-game currency with real money, and therefore you can buy in-game items that you wouldn't have been able to have, or at least that you would have taken a long time to get by playing without paying. So what's wrong with the creation of these virtual currencies? Well, it's very simple. They obscure the perception of the actual hit of transactions, making players less aware of their spending. By spending our O-Grind on Dofus or our V-Bucks on Fortnite, we don't really feel like we're spending real money anymore, and that encourages impulse and repetitive purchases. And the strategy to get you to buy more and more is simple. microtransactions. And yes, again, the prices of these virtual currencies are often very low, sometimes even below the dollar, especially on mobile games where it is extremely simple in one click to buy this kind of currency. In addition to that, the paid in-game items have prices adapted according to the dollar price of virtual currencies. For example, if you want an 800 V-Bucks skin, you won't be able to buy the 800 V-Bucks directly, you'll have to buy 1,000 because they don't sell for 800. Of course, this is done on purpose, and this small amount of unused currency will encourage players to buy even more to complete their purchases. These virtual currencies make you lose track of money and push you to spend more and more. Well, there is no need to draw a picture for you. I imagine that you all know what a pay-to-win game is. I'm telling you anyway. It's a game that you download for free, but anything you buy on it will affect your gameplay. The more you pay, the stronger you are. It's as simple as that. Be aware that most pay-to-win games are developed in such a way that it is almost impossible to perform on the game without paying. The most pay-to-win games are obviously the mobile games that I think you all know. Remember at the beginning of the video when I showed you the graph of the video game industry's revenue by where it came from? Do you see very well the huge part that mobile gaming represents? And can you guess where it comes from? For example, Red Shadow Legend made $1 billion in revenue for the year 2022, thanks to microtransactions on the game. Thank you, Kevin. I'm not going to give you an exhaustive list of all the games that work like this, but we could mention Candy Crush, Clash of Clans with its virtual currencies, the gems that allow you to shorten the construction times of your structures. This monetization model is made for whales, those players who spend astronomical amounts of money in the game, knowing that in addition some of these games are competitive games like Clash of Clans, so you have to pay over and over again to be the strongest. These games were literally created to break the bank. I hope you see where the problem lies. Don't move, I'll give you. This model creates a huge divide in the fairness of the game, which therefore loses all its interest. And wait, because if you don't want to pay, you can run ads to get fractions of improvement. What's this shitty game experience? A striking example would be on Star Wars Battlefront 2, where if you wanted to unlock all the characters, you would have to play either 4,500 hours or else pay just $2,100. $2,100? That's quiet. And the worst part is that the base game isn't even free. It costs $80. Here we really bring together the worst: microtransactions, virtual currency, and items that improve your gameplay paying. If you're not willing to put a salary in the game, you'll still suck. Wait, did I say we were bringing together the worst? Not sure actually. Now let's move on to the worst ways that studios have found to make consumers pay, and especially addicted: loot boxes. Frankly, it deserves a whole video on it, but we'll stay synthetic. So where does that come from? In RPGs, at the end of dungeons, to congratulate you on completing it, you could get chests that randomly rewarded you with items of varying value. And during a meeting in a random studio, they must have said to each other, "Wait, what if we made these safes payable?" But yes, what a good idea! That's how loot boxes were born. In a loot box, whether you buy with virtual currency or directly with your credit card, you have a small percentage chance of coming across an extremely rare item that is worth much more than the purchase price of the loot box. But to have this chance, you will have to buy loot boxes. By the way, doesn't paying a sum of money to have a small chance of multiplying your bet make you think of something? The video game casino, something very safe that is not at all accessible to children too. Do you realize how crazy that is? It's simply games of chance camouflaged in a video game. Tell yourself that in Germany, these transactions represent half of the turnover of the video game industry. These loot boxes are really the bottom of the industry's means of remuneration. And then the problems become much more serious because we will be able to compare them to gambling addiction. It's more just a matter of being addicted to building your towers on Clash of Clans faster to be stronger. Here we're talking about addiction to buying virtual items that are potentially worth more money. Knowing that in addition there is very little or no regulation on this, publishers often don't even bother to give the percentage of chances we have of hitting the jackpot on one of these loot boxes. And obviously, we don't take into account the hundreds of content creators who make videos with millions of views, of them opening this kind of box, participating in the expansion of this drift in spite of themselves. Fortunately, several governments are taking action against this kind of monetization. Obviously, the problem extends even more when you take into account that what is happening is in the video game sector, so a sector where there are a lot of minors. To finish, let's tackle the worst of video game monetization, gacha games. Gacha games get their name from the Japanese gashapon machines, toy dispensers where each turn of the crank results in a random object. In video games, this principle is transposed in the form of gaming slot machines to obtain characters, items, or in-game improvements. It's pay to win, mixed with games of chance. These draws have extremely low hit rates for the rarest items, which obviously pushes players to spend again and again to try their luck. You may have figured it out, but unlike lootboxing, gacha are at the very heart of the gameplay. The characters or items obtained directly influence the performance in the game, making the gacha not only addictive, but also almost essential to progress effectively. In other words, the game pushes players to shoot regularly in the hope of obtaining the best characters, often with tiny chances of success, thus encouraging repeated and sometimes massive spending. As you can see, the gacha transforms the game into a kind of virtual slot machine with all the dangers and psychological traps it entails, but cleverly disguised under a layer of attractive and often free play at the entrance. Between DLC already included in the game, but requiring an additional payment, microtransactions and virtual currencies that make you lose all notion of the value of money, battle passes that put pressure on you to unlock content that you have already paid for, unless you pay even more, competitive pay to win that literally forces you to pay to be strong on the game, loot boxes and gacha aka gaming games of chance accessible to children, and all the problems associated with them such as addiction. I think we've gone through all the wonderful ways that video game studios have found to extract every penny from the consumer. You understand better now, I imagine, this astronomical number of 183 billion income in 2023. And if you put things into perspective by telling yourself that at least this money will probably be used to develop more and more games, and especially better games, you are totally wrong. In 2023, the video game industry has seen studio closures and massive layoffs, despite their colossal revisions. More than 6,100 jobs have been lost due to rising development costs and restructuring. AAA games are seeing their budgets reach peaks, in some cases exceeding $300 million. This inevitably pushes studios to reduce their workforce or even cancel projects. But then we have the right to ask ourselves where all this money goes. Well, here I can only make assumptions, but my answer will be extremely simple: in the pocket of the shareholders. As ever, if you're like me, a video game lover, the best thing to do is to support games from small studios that are often cheap and give you direct access to all the content without going through all these borderline ethical means to empty your wallet. Don't be like Kevin if you can't afford it. And finally, the best video game investment, which will also cost you €0, is to subscribe to my channel if you liked the video and leave me your opinion in the comments. See you soon!